Bibles out, we're going to turn back to Proverbs. It's the first time. Well, I'm not going to start at the end of the lesson. Oh, no, it didn't work. Hold on. There it goes. Proverbs chapter 20, verse 18. It's the first time basically in 2 months that we've opened the book of Proverbs on Wednesday night after we've been doing Proverbs for about 7 years, give or take. I haven't looked that up exactly. I was going to mention, I should have mentioned this earlier, that today's sort of a special day for me. You know, I like anniversaries and things and sort of into numbers, and I've run the numbers a couple of times. I did get different numbers, but so I settled on this. Today is a halfway point of sorts. I've lived exactly half my life as a Christian. And tomorrow I will have lived more of my years with Christ, more of my days with Christ than before. Now I know that's some of you think, boy, that happened pretty early on for you, but a little different story and kind of a neat thing. It was 20 years ago that I first professed Christ at our Camp Sunlight during a skit of all things, as strange as that is to remember. And if anybody ever wants a video that is shot surprisingly well, I actually have a copy of that skit. Thanks to the Dan Blizzard archives. We pulled it out about 5 years ago, actually, and digitized it. I actually think Jill's the one that digitized it, though. Yeah, I think it was. But anyways, or maybe, I don't know who did. I have it. If you want to see it sometime, it's a piece of art. It'll be in the Smithsonian one day. But anyways, Proverbs 20, verse 18 tonight. Every purpose is established by counsel, and with good advice make war. The word for purpose there is the word that means to plan. You know, I was thinking about this. Is there anybody here who hasn't had a plan upended in the last 3 months? You say, oh, no, my life is everything I thought would happen 3 months ago came to fruition 3 months later. I don't know if that's true for anyone. Certainly not for the teachers among us. The last thing they wanted to do was teach virtually or whatever, and all of us have had travel plans or doctor's appointments or work plans interrupted, changed greatly because of what's happened. And so this verse is somewhat timely for us tonight as we think about plans. First thing, though, is to answer the question, what is a plan? What is a plan? Who wants to give us an on-the-spot, off the top of your head, good definition of a plan? Anybody? Anybody got one? I do. I got one. I'll put one up there. Here you go. How about a plan is a purpose to do something? Is the idea. When you plan to do something, you have a purpose to do it. Now, plans can be relatively small. My favorite example of that is what you ate for lunch today. I hope you didn't spend a lot of time debating what you ate for lunch today. I hope that you didn't have to call in some wise counselors to help you make the decision on what you ate for lunch today. Right? Plans can be small like that. Plans can also be large. We talk about plans, plans to move, plans to start a new career, plans to that are developing when you're in college, plans like that. Plans can be rather important, rather large, and everything in between. This theme of planning is one that comes up in the book of Proverbs. So we're going to look at a few different verses tonight to help us sort of fill this out. But one we looked at some time ago, Proverbs 19 verse 21 says, there are many devices or plans in a man's heart. There are many thoughts. There's many ideas in the heart of a man. Nevertheless, the counsel of the Lord, that shall stand. And in many ways, what we've experienced the last several months is a perfect example of this. That we had many plans, we had many desires, all of it got upended. But the one thing that did not get upended, the one thing that did not change, was the counsel of the Lord. And in thinking about presbytery, one of the things I was kind of trying to think about what I'm going to say for our church report, and how has the Lord used the last few months for good? Because we know it's been used for good. So how has it been used for good? And, we all have some different ideas on that. One thing I noticed among our church at large is a bit of a renewed enjoyment of our public gatherings. And even a renewed interest in our public gatherings. It certainly made me learn a lot more about our membership role and our adherence role and doing some deep dives. And one of the things that's come out, I don't want to scare you or anything, I now take attendance post every Sunday service. I have a spreadsheet. I have every household on the spreadsheet, and I go through and I click whether you were there or not. So far, some of you are doing really good. Seth and Sarah are not doing so good, I got to tell you. But it's been helpful, not, you haven't been here, but it just is, it's a mental exercise you normally do without structure. Well, who was missing today? Well, now I see it and know, okay, I don't know where this person was. I don't know why they weren't there, and can call and check, and that's been good. I've certainly spent more time on the phone with some of our winter residents and gotten to know some of them who come not as much as some others. And so there's things that are happening. There are good things, and it's interesting. It seems because of all this, we started putting things out, actually because of a request to Facebook Live. Our services go there now, which was something that was literally, I think, about 4 clicks to do. And we've seen some interest. So on and so forth, and there's any number of things that we could say that we know this did not surprise the Lord. We know that there was a sense of even that this was some element of a judgment and a chastisement upon our land. And we can ask the Lord to use that and build that. So when we think about plans, when we think about our plans, we always have to hold them a little bit loose, like the book of James says. It's not wrong to say we're going to go here, do this or that, and James, go here and make some money. But we always have to add to it, if the Lord wills. That the Lord might have something better. We're going to, in a kind of a surprising way, in that Luke 9 passage that I'll finally finish those verses this coming Sunday, where that village doesn't want Jesus to come, doesn't want to help support the ministry. And the Bible tells us right there was a reason for that. God was doing something because of that. And we can always have that confidence. So we should plan, but as we plan, we hold it loose and recognize that the Lord might have something far better. And our God never moves without a purpose. Second question to ask is, why is planning important? I'd like to use an illustration. How many of you have in one of these things? Anybody not spent? Not very many. I like that answer. Now, how long does it take you to set up a tent? Last time I set up a tent, actually, because remember the tent I had didn't have any poles. That's another story. But, setting up a tent doesn't take very long. Do you put any planning to where you place the tent?
Yes.
I never do. Is that part of the problem? But you should, right? There's certain things you should look for. You shouldn't put it on a slope. I've got this funny memory of waking up. First night I ever slept in a tent was with the Wands, actually. And Tim, Andy, and I were in a tent, and woke up and Andy was halfway up the wall. The tent was on the slope and he had kind of rolled and was taking the tent with him. He was a lot younger than he is now, a lot smaller, but it wasn't the best placed tent. You need to plan it out. Now, what happens though if you set your tent up and you put it in a bad spot? What can you do?
Get wet. Get flooded.
You can get flooded, you can get wet, but then you can move it, right? Tents are movable, right? By their very nature, some are easier to move than others, but that's just the nature of tents. Now, I'm using a tent to be an illustration of sort of a less involved plan, one of those smaller plans. Now, compare a tent to a house. A house has basic functions as a tent, right? Sorry. That was actually Sharon responding to my text message. But a house has the same basic functions, a lot more utility though. You cook in a house, you sleep in a house, you study in a house, you watch TV in a house. You don't do a lot of those things in a tent. You just sleep in a tent and then do everything else somewhere else. I mean, I suppose you could cook in a tent. What could go wrong? But, right, a house, and does planning go into where you put your house? Yeah. And if you plan poorly, what happens?
Smash.
Yeah. You can't pick it up and move it, can you? Back when I was investigating houses to buy, I found one on North Merritt Island that I really liked. And Kevin Mann was kind of helping me look at that, and he patient about it, and he was reading it, and he was reading it on the screen. He printed it up from my hand, and he starts reading, and it said something to the fact, this house is flood prone. He took the paper out of my hand and said, Steve, you can't have this house. Pulled it and threw it away. Now, I think if I remember, Debbie gave him a hard time for that, but it was the right thing to do. It was a bad house, and that's why it was within my price range at that time, because nobody wanted to live there because it had a major problem, right? And you can't just pick it up and move it. And that's an example of the type of plans that are being talked about in this proverb, that they're important. Why is planning important for these sort of house level plans? Well, that imagery is actually what it gives us here. The word to establish in verse 18 is the word that would be used to build a house. And we sometimes use this. This house was established in this year. Right? We sometimes even use the term that way. And that's the idea here, that this is a house level plan, something that's going to be lasting. And it is there, it's telling us, every purpose, every plan is established by counsel. That house plans, they need to have counsel to go along with it. They need to be established. They need to be built. Just like you don't just build a house, you have to take a survey, and you have to get blueprints, and you have to get approval, and so on and so forth. And why is that? Well, because they have a lasting impact. That house is going to stay right there. Some decisions we make have a huge impact over our lives. Whether you ate McDonald's or Wendy's for lunch did not have a huge impact for your life. The job that you pursue, the choice to change a job, the choice to move, the choice to the things you're studying in college and where you're going to go and things like that, who you marry and where you live and the church you attend and all those things, those have a huge impact and a lasting impact. And therefore, they need to have more thought put to them. And there are, in those type of things, potential dangers. We've all known people made a bad choice. For example, I've known several younger people that got a job that required them to work at Sunday. And they say, oh, no, it'll be okay. And that was the last we ever saw them in church. And that pulled them right away. The potential dangers that are there, the considerations that have to be made. Not every promotion would be a good thing. If with the promotion, what comes along with it is 20 to 30 more hours of work every week and It would ruin not only your sort of social life, but your opportunity at church and all sorts of things that would have a huge danger that comes along with it. Proverbs 21 verse 5 says, "The thoughts of the diligent tend only to plenteousness, but everyone that is hasty only to want." Everyone that is hasty, everybody that makes a quick decision, a fast decision. You know, a great technique for anytime you're buying anything. It's really expensive. Sleep on it. Think on it. Research it. Work on it. Consider it. Don't be hasty with it. In these type of decisions, the thoughts of the diligent tends to plenty. The thoughts of the hasty tend to lead us to want. That we have to take our time. And sometimes that's painful. And sometimes that's agonizing. But it will lead to a blessing. Proverbs 18 not only compares it to a house, but compares it to making war. And a war level planning. One of the things that I often think about that my generation and younger really do not understand is the devastating reality of war. War is not fun. War, and this is where history is so vitally important, the devastation that comes and is left in its wake. And it is a last resort reality. You know, I often think about the founding of our country. The American Revolution was the last resort. We were pushed towards that as a nation and as a people trying to form a nation. They tried everything else first and worked through everything else, and it was forced really upon them. It should be a last resort reality because it is an entire nation. 30 years ago, we had Desert Shield that led into Desert Storm. Just, I think, the anniversary of that. And I was impacted by that because my neighbor, whose first name I believe was Kevin, actually, I can't remember. He was deployed. He was in the reserves and he was deployed and was gone for months and months and months. And yet it was an entire nation reality like the World Wars, where everything has to be mobilized. You know, recently the Protection Production or something like that act that the president had used to get ventilators made, that's there because in times of war, don't make cars, you make tanks. You don't make farming equipment, weapons, and so on and so forth. And the whole nation has to come together. And because of those things, it requires careful planning. Decisions that are like making war. Notice what it says. And with good advice, make war. You notice that advice is modified by good. Why is that? Because there's two types of advice, right? There's good advice and there's bad advice. One of the crazy realities that the internet age presents us with, and is that you can find somebody somewhere that agrees with you. You look hard enough, no matter how crazy your idea is, you can find somebody who's written a blog post about it or a social media post about it who agrees with you. When all of this started way back in March, a pastor friend of mine sent me something he found on Facebook. And it was written supposedly by an emergency room nurse. And it was making a certain argument. And I wrote him back and I said, "Where did you find this?" His response is, "Oh, the credentials are in the thing. I have no idea where it came from." You know, it was, I'm making up the name. Sally Mae, registered nurse. And I thought to myself, well, does this mean anything to me? Because guess what? I could write a thing and it could say Steve Brinegar, emergency room doctor. And I could put it out there and some guy pass it along and you don't know me. Now, okay, so just so my children know, I'm not actually a doctor. And if you ask me medical advice, if you break your leg and you ask me advice and I say anything except go to the emergency room, I'm giving you bad advice. I don't really know how to fix a broken leg. Duct tape fixes everything, right? So let's just tape it up and move on. What could go wrong? Right? No, go to the emergency room. Get the proper help that you need. And we have to be very careful that there's a difference between what Paul describes as the itching ear syndrome, where we're just sort of looking for someone to tell us what we want to hear. There's a difference between wanting to be right and wanting to be wise. So we need to get good advice, and not all advice is good. We need to know the source. We need to know something about it. And that person, we need that person to help us along. That we need wise counsel. We need to seek out wise counsel. When we're making what could be described as war-level planning, we need to be very careful about where we get our information and who we seek out for advice. So what are some of the lessons here for us tonight? Well, number one, we ought to plan. We should plan. And the more important the plan, the more important the decision requires more depth of planning. Big decisions, life-altering decisions, the house building or war-making level decisions require some depth of planning. And good planning is never a solo operation. Now, with that said, with that example, for instance, if you were debating between McDonald's and Wendy's, you don't need to call me and ask where you should go. Because the conversation is going to go like this. I'm going to ask you, well, which place do you like better? You're going to say Wendy's. And you know what I'm going to say? No, go to McDonald's, because I don't want you to bother me with this. And you won't call me if I don't tell you what you don't want to hear, right? And that's not important. Nobody's ever done that. I anticipate, because I keep making this joke in different places, eventually some child, probably with the last name Brinegar, is going to call me and ask one day. But that's not the kind of planning we're talking about tonight. We're talking about those major life-altering decisions. And good planning is never done on your own. Good planning is done by seeking wise counselors that the Lord has given to us. And so let us be a people of prayerful plans, remembering that the wisest counselor that we should seek out is the Lord our God in His Word and through prayer. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your Word. Thank you that we can study it together tonight. And I just ask, Lord, that you would help us to be in our planning, and that we would seek out good advice. For we ask it in Jesus'